Hello, I'm Mark Walma, the author of the Abigail stories. Thank you for being willing to participate in this test. Today I'm going to be reading segments from the story The Flash of the Gun from Volume 3 of Abigail Massey at McAdam Station. For the purposes of this test, I've divided this excerpt into 3 distinct sections. I propose to read each section in a different reading style. First, simple reading. Second, a more bedtime story type reading. And third, what I'm calling a dramatic reading. I'm hoping you'll listen to all 3 of these segments and then help me to figure out which would be the best for the recording of podcasts and perhaps a books on CD version of the Abigail Massey stories. Thank you again, and I hope you enjoy these readings. Abigail Massey at McAdam Station, an excerpt from The Flash of the Gun. Plain reading style. The man stepped back, the small black pistol trained on her. He reached with his free hand over to the light switch and flipped it on. Abigail stood there in the stark new light from the electric bulb. Tears ran down her cheeks. Her lips trembled. She tried to look into the man's face, but could not tear her eyes away from the gun. "Please, sir," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Please don't hurt me." He looked her up and down, never moving the gun. Then came a cold, hard smile. "What's your name, then?" he asked. "Abigail, sir," she said, still not looking at him. "You work here, you say, at the hotel?" She nodded, tears flowing freely now, her knees feeling weak. "Come into the room," he said, stepping back, the gun never wavering. "Sit down on the bed before you collapse." She did as he said and dropped onto the bed, her entire body now shuddering with fear. He stood over her, examining her like a mechanic might examine a troublesome motor. Abigail did not look at him, but tore her eyes from the hole at the end of the gun, choosing instead to stare at her shoes. Fear bubbled inside of her, and she had no idea what she could do to escape him. "How many ways are there out of here?" he said finally. She gasped, surprised. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, looking up for the first time. "How many ways are there to get from here," he waved the gun at the room, "to the outside world?" "2, sir," she said after a minute. "One staircase at either end of the corridor." He nodded. "And how long will it take for the police to get here?" he asked, his dark eyes narrowed, his lips set. "I don't know, I'm sure," she said. "There's only Mr. White and McAdam. Anyone else will have to come from elsewhere, perhaps as far as Fredericton." He nodded. "So there's time yet, then, is there?" Abigail felt faint. Time for what? He ignored her and went back to the window, the gun still at the ready. He looked out for some time, then stepped back in front of her. "Okay, Abigail," he said, sizing her up again. "Here's what we're going to do. If you want to get out of this alive, you better get this right." She shivered, but tried hard to listen to him over her pounding heart. Bedtime reading style. "We're going to leave this here room and walk down to the corridor to the far end," he said, his eyes keen. "You're going to go first, then me. I'll have the gun on you every second of it, so if you try to run away or yell or, oh, don't worry, sir, I shan't. "Good," he said. "You're going to walk slowly down the hall, down the stairs, and out onto the platform. If we see anyone, you'll smile and say I'm a hotel guest, and you're helping me to find my bags." She nodded. "Once we get to the end of the platform, I'll disappear into the woods back there, and you'll never see me again. If you scream or make any noise at all, well," he held the gun up again. "I've already shot one pretty young lass today," he grinned. "Another 1 or 2 won't mean much in the long run, I guess." Abigail felt a shudder roll through her. The fear for her friends embraced her once again. "Please, sir," she gasped, desperate to know if one of her friends was, at that moment, being tended to by Miss Pierce. "Please, tell me whom." He laughed. "Who did I shoot?" He stepped forward and touched her cheek with the muzzle of the gun. "Don't you worry your pretty little head, Abigail," he said finally. "'Twas no one you'd know." Waves of relief washed through her, and she suddenly felt guilty. Just because it wasn't Jenny or Alice who lay injured, perhaps dying somewhere below, doesn't mean Abigail should feel good about things. "She got what she deserved," the man continued after a moment's pause, "double-crossing me out of my share." There was rage in his face now, and Abigail pulled herself back, terrified of the violence in his expression. "Sir," she said in a quaking voice, "we should move now. Every second you wait." He stopped and pulled himself together. Then he nodded. "You're right." He went to the door and listened for sounds from the corridor outside the room. He must have heard none because he nodded to Abigail and waved her forward with the gun. She stood up stiffly, forcing iron into her knees and trying to keep her breathing under control. He pulled the door open and followed her through into the empty hall. Dramatic reading style. Abigail felt the muzzle of the gun against her lower back as she moved slowly, so slowly down the corridor toward the end of the hotel. "Good," he whispered into her ear, and the feeling of his hot breath on the back of her neck made her feel sick to her stomach. Slowly, slowly. The corridor had never seemed so long. Abigail felt the slow walk to the top of the stairs had taken an hour, and every step brought the jolt of cold steel on her back. She moved carefully onto the landing and then down the steps, the man keeping close behind her. She prayed they would meet no one, especially here on the narrow staircase. In here, one bullet could do too much damage, and she could feel his tension rise and the excitement grow in his whispered instructions to her. They reached the ground floor without meeting anyone, and Abigail let out a breath of relief. "Now," he said, "step out onto the platform." She took a step forward, but felt his free hand grab her elbow and hold her back. "Be quick once we're outside, like we're two pals out for a stroll. I'll be beside you. But remember, the gun's at the ready." She nodded stiffly. "If anyone appears, get rid of 'em, fast. Don't try any funny stuff or it won't go well for you, or for them. Get me?" Abigail felt the shock of that threat in her bones and let out a gasp. She looked at him as he took up his place beside her. His chin was set, and his eyes were as cold and hard as the gun he now slipped under his jacket, still pointing at her. She stepped out. The platform was clear and the sun dazzling. They must have cleared it as a result of the shots, she thought to herself. This might just work. The two figures began a quick, casual stroll down the platform in the direction of the baggage storage room and the end of the platform beyond. Abigail could see the railway shops in the distance and prayed once again that no one would come out to greet her. The man stayed right beside her, his face tight, his hand never moving from beneath his jacket. She could feel her heart now, slowing slightly, believing that this might soon be over. They passed the jail cell without incident. Abigail's spirits began to rise. The man's grip was beginning to relax on her arm. 10 more steps and he would release her, she was sure, and run the short distance into the nearby woods by the lake. 1 step, all was well. 2 steps, no one in sight. 3 steps, he let go of her arm and tossed a glance over his shoulder. 4 steps, he moved his other arm as if to tuck the gun away. "Abigail!" a voice called from the luggage room. "Thank goodness! We were so worried for you." Cousin Martha burst from the room and hugged her tight, tears coursing down her face. "Oh, Abby, we didn't know what had happened to you." So those are the 3 reading styles. The first, plain reading style. The second, more of a bedtime story reading style. And the third, a dramatic reading style. We'd really appreciate it if you would now read the instructions on the website in order to give us your insight and your thoughts on which of these 3 reading styles would be best for us to use in both the recording of a podcast and the recording of a books on CD type Abigail Massey McAdam Station product. If you have any other suggestions, if you think Mark Walma shouldn't even try to read them himself and someone else should do it for him, that's fine. Feel free to give us that kind of input as well. And remember, if our website doesn't give you the opportunity to give us the kind of feedback you want to give us,